On this date, 23 years ago, 246 people went to sleep ahead of their morning flights. 2,309 people went to sleep in preparation for another routine day at the office. 343 of New York's bravest, 71 of New York's finest, and 8 paramedics went to sleep not knowing what their next shift would bring. And yet, that Tuesday morning, for those of us who were in New York on that day, remember one of the clearest, bluest, most magnificent skies we've laid eyes on. And when you reflect back on the morning of September 11th, 2001, one can't help but think about that what seemed perfect morning. There was a beautiful blue sky. The temperatures were perfect. And people were beginning their day to what they thought was going to be one of beauty. But in seconds, that changed. Because we witnessed one of the greatest attacks on American soil in our history. And at that moment, not only did downtown Manhattan change, not only did the state of New York change, not only did the United States of America change, but the world changed. And we haven't been the same, nor will we ever be, since. And at that moment, when we were attacked, and so many people ran away from the dangers, there were men and women who stood in the lobby of those buildings, who stood in the surrounding areas, who hopped on rigs in firehouses throughout the city of New York, who jumped in patrol cars and ESU trucks and made their way to downtown Manhattan, running towards the danger. The same way first responders did just miles away at the Pentagon and at that field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And they ran towards danger, running upstairs of our beloved World Trade Center, not realizing that they were rising up those stairs only to get closer to heaven, because that's where they were headed. And when those buildings collapsed in downtown Manhattan, again, the world changed. Thousands died. But it brought out, while we saw the very worst in humanity as our country was attacked by terrorists, we also saw some of the best of the United States of America. If you think to the days following the September 11th attacks, you couldn't walk into a store and find an American flag because they were sold out. People lined the West Side Highway in Manhattan, cheering for first responders as they made their way to Ground Zero. People were patriotic. People were rooting for the United States of America. And just this past weekend, I stood in my district, the 4th Congressional District of New York, on Long Island. I stood with former Congressman Peter King and our town supervisor there, Don Clavin, in dedicating a street to a gentleman by the name of Bob Beckwith. And he became an icon in the days following September 11th because he was the gentleman, the city firefighter, who stood on the pile with President Bush when President Bush grabbed that megaphone and told the first responders on the pile, the iron workers on the pile. And President Bush said to them, "We hear you. We hear you. The world hears you." And if we think back those now 23 years, a lot has changed. And tonight and tomorrow are an opportunity for us to remember and reflect and to think about our friends and our loved ones, our neighbors who died that day. But it's also an opportunity to honor them. And nearly 2 decades ago, when I took my oath to become a member of the New York City Police Department, I swore to protect and defend the city of New York, but I also made a promise in my heart. And it's the same promise that many first responders make to themselves when they take their oath, and that is to never forget. Never forget our brothers and sisters who made and paid the ultimate sacrifice. But yet, 23 years later, people are forgetting. And that's why I thought it was so important this evening to have this special order and to invite colleagues from both sides of the aisle to talk about not just the horrific events of September 11th, 2001, but the last 23 years. An NYPD detective by the name of Lou Alvarez called the 4th Congressional District home. He was a decorated member of the NYPD, a member of the bomb squad, and served our great department during 9/11 and spent months on that pile digging for brothers and sisters and survivors. And he contracted 9/11 cancer. And instead of spending his final days at home, surrounded by loved ones and family, he spent some of his final days here on Capitol Hill. He was with his family, he was with his friends, he was with his brother and sister police officers and firefighters, but he spent it here on Capitol Hill, advocating and knowing that in just days, he probably was going to pass from this life onto heaven. But he spent his final days here, fighting for funding in the 9/11 health care bill. And that's really one of the things that I want to focus on today, and I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle do the same. And realize that on September 11th, 2001, there were 343 members of the FDNY that died that day. Since September 11th, 2001, there's been over 343 more members of the FDNY who have died from 9/11 related illnesses. On September 11th, 2001, 23 of my brothers and sisters from the NYPD died that morning. And since September 11th, 2001, over 375 more have died. You see, this is no longer what was probably referred to 20 years ago as a New York, New Jersey, Northeast issue. There are people dying from 9/11 related illnesses in every state of this country. And there is no reason that 23 years later, heroes like Lou Alvarez need to be spending their final days walking the halls of Congress demanding funding that they deserve. And this is not a partisan issue. I've had the honor to work with Congressman Garbarino, and Senator Schumer, and Senator Gillibrand, and our colleagues from New York and New Jersey to continue to push for this funding. And years back, when the funding was first proposed, there were people from the budget office, there were actuaries who said the funding that was provided would carry us well to the end of the century. They were wrong. They were wrong because more and more people die every single day. And when I hear from some of our colleagues and staff and saying, well, you know, year after year, there seems to be less and less of these 9/11 survivors coming here to fight for the funding. Yeah, they are less because they're dying. They're dying because they were told on the days following September 11th that the air was safe to breathe. It wasn't safe to breathe. And they are continuing to die. And unless Congress acts, the World Trade Center Health Program will have to announce in 2027 that responders and survivors who suffer from an illness from their heroic service to our country will not be able to apply for the program. And unless this body does something, in 2028, the program will bar new enrollees and make other anticipated cuts in services. So tonight, I'm not just here to talk about the events of September 11th. We all know what happened. We know who attacked the United States of America. We are thankful for the men and women who not only serve this body, but men and women throughout this country who left the comforts of the United States of America to defend our democracy and to fight terrorism. Tonight, my plea is that we join together. If we all want to say that we never forget, well, then let's never forget. And let's work together to fully fund the 9/11 healthcare program. And with that, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my good friend and a great supporter of first responders in New York City and throughout New York State. That is Nicole Maliataka. I want to share a message with anyone listening and our colleagues on both sides of this House. That never forget is not just a saying. It's not just a Twitter handle. It's not just a hashtag. And it's not just something that you put on posters on social media. It's a promise. And if we truly want to never forget, then it is imperative that we put our support behind the healthcare funding that these heroes, these survivors, these Americans deserve. And with that, Madam Speaker, I pray that those who died on 9/11 and continue to die as a result of those terrible attacks, may they rest in peace, and may their families expect from all of us to do the right thing, because that's exactly what we should be doing. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.